Good afternoon and welcome to this week's edition of Halftime Talk. I was going to say a special edition because it's a very strange moment in time, and of course it's always special every 6 months when we get to sit down with Dr. Anas Alhajji, Managing Partner, Energy Outlook Advisors, joining us from Texas. So Anas, welcome.
Thank you.
What would be the first question to start with? I'm going to start with what, from a very narrow, selfish prism of the oil markets, which is kind of what is our center of the universe, or of our gravity, if you like. But the first question would be, why are the oil markets, the oil price, seemingly nonchalantly reacting to what I would regard as probably the most significant geopolitical collision in the Middle East, probably since, I'm going to even go back beyond Iraq, which were essentially a slaughter by the US. But here you have the two biggest sort of titans in the region, Turkey aside, facing off, maybe 67, 73. I don't know where you'd go back or something comparable, but the markets are behaving like it's just another skirmish in the region. Your thoughts on that and why the markets seem to be taking this all in their stride?
In our publications, basically immediately after the attacks started, we published a report, and we were lucky that we predicted all of this. And there are several reasons for that. Strangely enough, just before the attack, the 2-3 weeks before the attack, Iranian oil exports spiked to levels we have not seen in years. At the same time, we've seen a spike. From what to what? Sorry?
I was saying from what amount? I generally operate on the assumption that their production is about 3.5. Exports?
Well, it has nothing to do with production. These are exports.
Okay.
So exports spike because could be coming from inventories.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And China's oil inventories increased to the highest on record just before the attack. So the way we analyze this, to answer your question, is this: that the Chinese has massive amount of storage, about 1.1 billion barrels. Now the US, with all its massive consumption, the total of the strategic petroleum reserves and commercial reserves is only about 800 something. The Chinese basically have way lower consumption, slow economic growth, yet their inventories are 1.1 billion.
They also import 15 million, or not 15, 12 million. I mean, they have much bigger dependency on imports than the US.
Correct. But the issue here is, we've seen this in the last 10 years from China, that they import about 1.55 million barrels a day from Iran. And we ran several scenarios, and assuming that they will lose all of it, completely, all of it.
Well, it seems all it stopped right now.
They can, it's not really, it did not stop. We still see the flow day and night coming out of Iran, despite the fact that they dispersed the tankers on the first night and the second night. But now we have a resumption of exports to China almost normally, despite everything. But the idea here is, we ran several scenarios, and assuming that they lose all the 1.55 million barrels a day completely, they can compensate by going back to inventories, releasing the same amount from inventories for 3 months in a row. Same quantity and same quality, because it is an Iranian crude that's been stored.
Oh, right.
So same quantity, same quality.
So that excess of imports.
And 3 months. And inventories in China will decline only to 22 levels, to 2022, which means that it will remain high anyway. So, and we know for sure, I can assure you without any information right now, that the Chinese are withdrawing oil from inventories as we speak, because we've seen this so many times in the last 10 years. So that's the first line of defense. The second one is the group of 8 in OPEC Plus is going to meet very soon to determine the level of increase in August. And most likely they will increase the production ceiling. And please, for the audience, notice that I said ceiling. I did not say production.
Not quotas.
They will increase production. They will correct. They will increase production ceiling by 411,000 barrels a day, just like in the previous months.
Okay.
Now, do
you generally concur that the 411 accelerated increases of production ceiling over the last few months hasn't translated into an equal amount of new barrels on the oil market? Is that
we made a big wave in the market in April when we said that, and the reason why we have a report that we published at that time said, look, the market is getting it wrong. When everyone was bearish, if you recall, some people were talking about $40 oil. We went against the grain and we told them, look, you guys are missing the point. We have the Hajj coming in Saudi Arabia, where the use of oil increases substantially because they need gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, fuel oil, etc.
Especially when Hajj is in the summer like it is right now.
Correct. And then we have the summer consumption of oil because of the demand for cooling, which adds to about, in a regular summer in the Gulf region with Iran, it adds about 1.2 million barrels a day in July and August.
Of demand.
Correct. So what happened is most of that increase, if that is an increase, and I will explain in a minute that it is not an increase, I'll show why. But even if that's a full increase, most of it will be consumed within those countries and the global market will see very little of it. But what analysts missed since April is that most of that oil is already in the market months earlier from Iraq and Kazakhstan. I mean, that was the problem. They were overproducing, and that overproduction is already in the market. So when you look at April and May, it literally kind of legitimized those increases. So it was on paper. So there was no reason to be bearish on those OPEC increases. Now, the concern is if we are not going to end up in economic growth or higher economic growth in China and the United States because of a trade deal in the first quarter of 2026, then we might face a serious problem then.
But not till then, because a lot of forecasts that this supply increases will start to be weigh on the market once we get through this window of higher demand in the US due to the driving season as well as the cooling season in the Gulf. But once that passes, like the increase you just mentioned, the next one, 400,000 plus in August, that will start to weigh on the supply overhang of demand. At least that's most forecasts at the moment.
Correct.
Before the war started on Friday.
Correct. Unless we have the trade deal, because until now, Trump talked about the trade deal with China, but we did not see something more official than that. But if we end up with a good trade deal, then it's going to be bullish because we are going to see increase in economic growth that we have not seen in more than a year. And therefore, the market can handle those increases in the fourth quarter and the first quarter. But without this trade deal, then we have a problem. However, on the other side,
let me just ask on that from the outlook point of view, that we're seeing this period again, just sort of parking, and we'll come to it in the next segment on the war and its implications. But if we just take the April, May, June period where prices dropped to the 60s and very briefly on Brent below 60, but ultimately average in the second quarter about 65. And that started to seem to put a big squeeze on more expensive production like the shale and other areas. Has this period restricted supply coming from elsewhere, which should support more OPEC plus barrels in the second half? Your thoughts on that equation?
Yes. So here is the problem. Forget about prices for a moment.
Yeah.
We do have serious problems regardless of prices. What analysts missed about the OPEC increase is that in May, in the month of May, if you look at the exports of the United States, plus Brazil, plus Venezuela, plus Ecuador, they declined by 1.1 million barrels a day. And that has nothing to do with prices. The other issue is they also ignored the fact that Kazakhstan lowered exports by 180,000 barrels a day. So you put all of those together, you can see why we did not go to 40. And why we said that this is not bearish. But when it comes to the impact of prices on shale, and you are raising a very important point here, and I think a lot of people miss this point. The data kind of misleading, and here is why it's misleading. Because we are coming out of a 3-year period of mergers and acquisitions, and we are just done.
Very big ones.
Correct. As a result of that, what we see as a result of this is layoffs. The layoff that took place has nothing to do with prices. This is just the duplication of jobs when companies merge. And the second one is when it comes to decline in rigs, it's literally the result of that too. And we can look and see which companies did that and which company did not. Now, we know that there are small companies that will suffer anyway. And many
but there's
of our
even
colleagues,
there's fewer and fewer small companies, right? I mean, one of the other elements of that consolidation is now you've got the big majors controlling the Permian and the shale play, and they've got a different calculation as to when to put money in the ground, right?
correct. But many of our colleagues, you and I, basically the ones who appear on your show and others, and almost you have everyone in the industry on your show. So many of our colleagues basically missed a very important point that let's make them two. The first one is any of the medium-sized to smaller companies are hedged, and therefore current prices are not going to affect them until probably next year or the end of the year. And the second point is that they always depend on a chart from the Fed of Dallas because it does this survey and that chart went viral. Look at the cost. They cannot do this. They cannot do this. I want to clarify a very important point here that I don't spend a second on that chart or the Fed survey. It's useless. And this started opening my eyes to it when several years ago I was talking to several CEOs about it, and they have no clue it exists. And it's supposed to be a survey of CEOs. So who is filling the application? Who is filling the surveys? If the CEOs are not aware even this survey exists. So I did some search basically, and one thing that journalist has to look at is the percentage of respondents. Mm-hmm. And who is responding. Whatever the Fed is showing few small producers who do not matter to the industry, period.
Wow.
I can assure you that even if prices go to 50, I'm talking about WTI, the medium-sized to larger companies will make money at 50.
Wow.
Okay. Now,
in the
their
shale,
investment might decline. Yes. Now, their investment might decline. But in terms of making money, they still make money. And the reason why, because the Fed is reflecting the smaller producers who are on the peripheries with a couple of wells and, producing 200 barrels or something like this.
A much higher cost of
But
production.
don't expect that ExxonMobil and Chevron are responding to the Fed.
What about the other, you mentioned in your comment there that the decline across the Americas. What was happening in the other parts in South? I think you mentioned Brazil, Venezuela. I think we got some headline sense that Venezuela's under a tighter sanction regime again. But why were the declines around those other countries? If it wasn't
Let me
price.
explain the whole thing because they are tied together. We have a serious problem. It's been going on for a long time. When we say that the U.S. is exporting 4 or 5 million barrels a day, let's remember that some of that is Canadian crude.
Coming through the American pipe system.
Or basically mostly blended.
Right.
It's blended with condensates or naphtha or something else. But the idea here is if we have Trans Mountain Pipeline basically taking to the west, that's lost from the south.
The west is in Canada.
Correct.
Right, and not going through America to the Gulf.
Correct. So naturally, U.S. exports, even without any decrease in production, naturally, just because of Trans Mountain, U.S. exports will decline. In addition to that, the Trump administration reinforced the sanctions on Venezuela, which has no impact, by the way, and revoked the licenses of other companies to lift the Venezuelan oil, etc. Again, it has no impact. What has the impact was he imposed a 25% tariffs on countries that import the Venezuelan oil. And that's the impact. All of a sudden, the Chinese and Indian companies stopped buying the Venezuelan crude. And if the Chinese and the Indians don't take it, who's going to take it? And for Brazil, basically, and Ecuador, they are all technical issues and maintenance and everything else.
Let's talk a little bit about the current crisis in the region. Let's start with some of the bigger geopolitics of it and then sort of look at the energy implications of it. When we look at the big headlines here, the general headline from Israel is a preemptive strike to curtail Iran's ability to move towards nuclear weapon capabilities. Generally concurred, it would appear, by the Trump administration. Your thoughts on that as the reason and the scale of it, and your thoughts about America's role, and will it become more active than passive suppliers of weapons into actually active engagement? So some of the why it's happened and the participation of America in an active.
Since we have a very limited time, I will focus on what is not mentioned in the media.
Please.
And a lot of people do not know about it. The most important impact of what happened until today, and people think oil, oil, oil. No. The most important impact was in the natural gas market, not in oil. And it has just the consequences are devastating. And the media has not caught with that yet. We have major gas and power shortages as we speak in Egypt, Jordan, and Iraq. Egypt and Jordan because Israel closed its largest gas field and then stopped the exports to Jordan and Egypt. Suddenly, they were not prepared. And as you know, luckily right now, the weather is kind of still a little nice in those areas, but if it gets hot, it will be a disaster. And Egypt resorted to the use of diesel in power plants, but we learned, our friends at Ataqa basically had interviews with some Egyptian officials that was 2 days ago. They said, our inventories of diesel will last only for 7 days. And that's not enough to bring anything from Saudi Arabia, because it takes more than 7 days to bring that diesel from Saudi Arabia, from Yanbu. So the crisis is just at the door. Jordan basically is burning fuel oil. They can literally get fuel oil from Iraq via tankers on the roads, as they've been doing for a very long time. Here is the problem. Iran reduced its gas exports to Iraq substantially. And as of last night, we heard that it might stop completely. At the same time, the Trump administration prevented Iraq from importing electricity from Iran. So the only choice for Iraq is to use fuel oil, which means that Jordan is not going to get it. So the most important impact right now really is coming through the natural gas, and that's probably because the media always talk about oil, oil, oil. They are ignoring this. But these are big stories.
And when you think of the great threat in the sense of the Gulf, the idea that the Strait of Hormuz, I mean, the UAE can get oil out, Saudi can get oil out, but Qatar, one of the world's largest exporters of LNG, has no alternative but through the Straits of Hormuz.
Correct. But let's move to that, because this is a very important point. And these are the most recent percentages, by the way, the ones I'm going to mention. 83% of the oil out of the Gulf goes to Asia, and almost zero goes to the United States. Very little goes to Europe. 87% of LNG from the Gulf, as you know, we have the United Arab Emirates and we have Qatar. 87% of it goes to Asia. And the rest basically goes to the rest of the world. And therefore, any problems in the Hormuz Strait, okay, will affect Iran's friends, not Iran's enemies. At the same time, most of Iran's seaborne oil exports, and I say seaborne because they export by land to other places on the other side, almost all of it, beside the ones that are going to the Gulf, goes through the Hormuz Strait, which means that their exports will stop if the Hormuz Strait stops. And 80% of their seaborne imports come through the Hormuz Strait. Many of the stuff the Iranians eat on a daily basis is imported through the Hormuz Strait. So there is no interest for Iran to close the Hormuz Strait. And yesterday I tweeted, I did go over everything being said since 1980 about the Hormuz Strait. And it turns out there are about 15 times when the Iranian officials threatened to close the Hormuz Strait. And none happened. And what's strange is that the media exaggeration, of course, there are too many lies since the war started, and exaggeration all over. I'm going to give you three examples, basically. The first example is related to this. The guy who tweeted yesterday and said that by 1 p.m. we are going to ask for permissions for the ships that are crossing the Hormuz Strait to get a permit before they do. The guy has no official position at all. He used to be a former minister. Has no official and nothing. And then, you know, the media picked it up and going crazy over this. 2 days earlier, a member of the Security Committee in the Parliament, which is the Majlis, said we are studying the idea of closing the Hormuz Strait. But the Majlis has no say in foreign policy, has no say in strategic issues or decisions or wars or nothing. The Majlis basically is a domestic issue. They focus on, traffic lights and roads and other things. But the media picked it up, it went viral. The third story, which was very annoying to me, was headlines. Israel hits the largest gas field in the world. First of all, the gas field is shared with Qatar. Qatar is not part of the war. Most of it is in Qatar. Whatever left in Iran, it's been developed in 24 phases over a period of 25 years. They are in phase 14, which has many projects. Among those projects is a mini refinery. Within that refinery, there are 4 units, and the drone hit only one unit. It's just like a storage tank. But the media, Israel has the largest gas field in the world. Now imagine when we have clients who are investors on Wall Street with a couple of $1 billion panicking because they hear that. They don't know what the difference even between oil and gas. And they call us like at 4 a.m. in the morning, panicking what they want to do because of those headlines. So the issue here that people should understand is that the Hormuz Strait is subject to international law. The gray area where basically ships can go through without any problems at all. The gray area, because it's tight, relatively tight between two countries, and every country has 12 miles, the national waters and the international waters overlap. What the international law says here is if Iran declares war, officially declares wars against the United States, they have the right to block military ships, but not commercial ships. And that's it. The problem for Iran is the waterways are in Oman, not in Iran. And the guy who tweeted yesterday about permission, well, they are not going through your waters in the first place. They are going through the Omani waters. But again,
I suppose the other part of
details.
the part where things can be disrupted and yet isn't reflected in the oil price. I mean, there's a few dollars clearly in the oil price, but nothing much elevated. Is like sort of the events like we saw yesterday. Two ships collided off the coast of Fujairah. Reports of shipping in the Gulf having GPS jammed because of the amount of activity and radar activity going on with all of the war activity. These sort of accumulated logistical insurance, all sorts of other things like that start to become problematic, but not necessarily catastrophic. But ultimately, as it accumulates, if it does continue to accumulate, could nearly create its own sort of de facto closure or slowdown of the waterways.
I have a comment on that, and then I will build on it. The comment basically is because all the media is focusing on it, we are hearing all those details.
Yes.
But these collusions and other things, etc., happen all the time. But the media is not interested because there was no war and there was nothing. So it's the accumulation of news rather than the accumulation of events. But when we talk
in the
about
fog
Iran,
of war, you've got to kind of go what you can on a certain level. Yeah, I mean the collision yesterday in Fujairah off the coast of the UAE was sizable on any day of the week. I mean, two ships colliding, one going up in a big fireball. That doesn't happen every day. There's things happen, but not quite to that extent. So, on the surface of it, that could be anything.
The owner of that ship, I think it's an Indian company, are very lucky. Because that ship was ready for salvage.
Job done.
Yes, but the thing is, we have to distinguish between the official Iranian government and the regime. And the regime basically is everything non-official, like the Revolutionary Guard and other organizations and all the cronies in Yemen or in Iraq or in other Gulf countries, etc. And we do not think that the government, the official government, will do anything in the Gulf. It is really the others who will do it. And the problem when others do it is we don't know who are they, we don't know when, we don't know anything about it. So
let's just, if we can, and as wrapping up, because we're in our last few minutes, is give us some sense. Obviously, you're in Texas, you've got some sense of where this is all playing out in the US narrative. We're all sitting here in the Gulf wondering, is the US going to come into this and elevate it into a very big issue? I mean, it's big, obviously. How much bigger can it get? But it obviously can get much bigger, even in the scale of weaponry that can be deployed. Where do you see the US position on this? Does Trump have a clear political runway to go forward on this? Is there anything that would restrain him? Your thoughts on?
I agree with the view that Trump was trapped by Netanyahu on the expression of zero enrichment. because previous administrations had no problem with some enrichment, but not. So the whole idea here, if Trump gets out of that idea of zero enrichment, let's say it's 12 or 8% or whatever that percentage is, the problem is solved. Okay, so this idea that he got trapped into the zero enrichment is the issue. I don't know whether Trump is going to act on it or not, but we know that the Trump supporters are, I mean, really disappointed. And his support is really fragmented right now. We'll see how he's going to react to it. Since yesterday, basically, we've seen two big guys who are supporters of Trump being attacked by Trump. And one of them basically at the head of the intelligence when she said that there is no evidence that there is a bomb in Iran or something like this. And then,
I don't care what
Tucker
she
Carlson,
thinks, I think his words were, was it?
right. And then Tucker Carlson, basically, who is a big supporter of Trump, basically, Trump was making fun of him. But the whole idea here is it seems that the oil sector is going to be saved. We are not going to have problems. And people are throwing the idea of regime change casually as if it's a soccer game and the coach is changing a player. It's just kind of really annoying when you hear people talking like this. They forget how large Iran is, and they forget that Iran is not only Tehran. So there is more to the country than that. At the same time, we have to distinguish between the regime collapsing and a regime change. These are completely two different things. The collapse of the regime is the worst thing that can happen to everyone, including Israel, including the United States, China, Russia, India, the Arab world, etc. No one wants a regime collapse. A regime change basically would raise the following questions, and probably will end with those questions. The first question is, seriously, what is the future of Israel if no Hezbollah, no Hamas, no Houthis, and no Iranian regime?
No boogeyman.
That's number one. Number two, we know that there are no American bases in the Caspian Sea or around the Caspian Sea, and there is no NATO bases in Caspian Sea. So will Russia accept a US friendly government in Iran who is partner in the Caspian, and all of a sudden NATO is in the Caspian? For God's sake, we already have a war for 3 years because NATO got closer. And the third one is, what will China do, since China depends heavily on resources from Iran? And most of the stuff that Iran basically uses on a daily basis come from China. It's a big market for China. And it is the way for China to get to Europe. So will China basically just give up Iran to the United States, given all the trade wars and everything we've seen? So those who are throwing this idea of regime change casually, it shows pure ignorance of history, geography, geopolitics, and everything else.
Well, I think that is the place to conclude, because inevitably that is some big questions, and I certainly concur on that there are some very big issues here, and maybe this is in some ways tied into the emerging Cold War between the US and China, that Iran this is some proxy elements of this conflict are proxy elements of that wider war, and there's many strings to those issues. Listen, Dr. Anas Alhajji, we need an hour, not 30 minutes. This is a part one.
Let's do something.
Well, this is a part one. Cool. We'll have to do a part two, and we can't wait 6 months because there's too much going on. So we'll try and schedule something soon again. Dr. Anas Alhajji, Managing Partner, Energy Outlook Advisors. Shukran Katir, thank you so much. Happy June 21st, Midsummer's Day, and all of the different things. And look forward to catching up with you soon again. All the best, Anas. Shukran.